Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Richard Smith is a nutritionist, professional athlete, and a professional British bodybuilding champion. Richard was 33 when he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes with a body fat percentage just under 60%. Wow. He also suffered with other severe health ailments that were destroying his life. After a standard medical testing suite with his doctor, he found out that his blood glucose levels were through the roof, his blood pressure was high, his kidneys were in bad shape, and his Pattern-B LDL cholesterol was high, which are all signs of poor metabolic health. Richard knew that something had to change. When a friend introduced him to a ketogenic diet, Richard started to experience amazing results. Feeling like he had a secret that he needed to share with the world to help transform the health and lives of others led him to found Keto Pro. Keto Pro provides a support that helps people as they adopt a ketogenic diet and also ensures that people have access to affordable, premium products that pack in a ton of health benefits. You can find him on his website at www.theketopro.com or on YouTube at Keto-Pro. Richard Smith, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, thank you so much for the invitation to come on. I'm super excited and honored to be here.
It is such an honor to host you. I think everybody who's listening can tell that you have an incredible story to share. And we're definitely going to get to that story here in a second. Before we do that, I want to talk about a recent experience that you were involved in that I was also very honored to be involved in, which was the Carnivorathon. Can you tell us a little bit about that event and how that came up?
Yeah, so I recently came across another carnivore in the UK. Stephen Thomas, coach Stephen Thomas. It's crazy because the UK relative, to the rest of the world is incredibly small. Our community is incredibly small, but I had never crossed paths with Stephen prior to him interviewing one of my clients. And it was one of my clients that mentioned me to him. So we reached out, we decided to record some content together, and off the back of that, we seemed to get on incredibly well. We bounced off each other incredibly well. And he pitched me this idea of going live for 24 hours, doing an education piece on carnivore mainly. Obviously, this is health related. We had amazing speakers such as yourself on there, preaching the word about your journey, explaining about the health impacts of going low carb, carnivore, changing your diet and lifestyle, because there's a lot of common misconceptions out there, isn't there? So the idea was to jam pack this with world leading speakers and go live for 24 hours, which in itself, to me, going back a few years ago when I was on carbohydrates, would not have been possible, because even though we were live for 24 hours, I was obviously awake for a few hours prior to this. And then when we finished the 24-hour, I had to go into work because we ran it through the night. So we began at 8 a.m. on Sunday and ran through to 8 a.m. on the Monday. And obviously being self-employed, I didn't have the option of not going into work. So I went into work and worked for the rest of the day. And then at 6 p.m., I went for a 5-mile run which is, I couldn't have stayed awake for 24 hours on carbohydrate, let alone be in, because it's, even though you are sitting or standing in Stephen's case for 24 hours, and it seems like you're not doing an awful lot, the brain is constantly working, listening and engaging with people. It's not something you could just switch off and just become blank screened to, you can't get the glaze over your eye and just switch off to what people are saying, because you need to be able to jump in and put your point across in there. So I found it incredibly difficult to stay hyper focused for 24 hours. And I think Stephen would admit as well that each of us sort of zoned out temporarily throughout the process. The last hour was, it was just fighting for survival. But I was shocked when we finished. I went into work and I felt as if, I had a good night's sleep. I worked all day, went for a 5-mile run. And I didn't eat until after the run. So I went, a considerable length of time without eating or sleeping. And I went to sleep that night, woke up and carried on the next day. But yeah, an incredible event. Obviously, we had speakers such as yourself coming on, spreading words of wisdom, which was massively appreciated, by the way. But yeah, that was the brainchild of Stephen Thomas, and I'm grateful that he invited me to come on. And I think, you know, we're going to continue with this and roll on and try to do another one next year. But for any of you that are interested, Steve and I go live every Sunday at 5 p.m. UK time. We do live at 5, and we talk about we cover any questions that listeners may be thinking of asking. A lot of the same questions do come up. There are curveballs that constantly come in. There was one last week about vitamin D and lack of sunlight and things. So it's super informative. And it's an incredible watch. We go live generally for an hour on that, but the topics we cover are quite incredible. So anybody listening wants to take part in that, feel free to sign up to that. And we'll have to get you on there, I think, one day. Yeah, we'll have to get you on as a guest. I think that would be fantastic. We can put questions out to our audience and see what they come up with for you.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. I'd be honored to participate in it. As long as it wasn't during one of my beloved Formula One races, that's totally fine. Just kidding. So when Stephen presented you with this idea, were you nervous at all? Like, did he have to hard sell you on the idea, or were you on board like from the beginning?
Yeah, not at all. He asked me and my instant reaction was yes. I was not daunted by being live for 24 hours. You know, from the lifestyle that you live, that the energy we get is superior. You know, your mental clarity is through the roof. I did supplement with exogenous ketones throughout the 24 hours, which is one of the products that we manufacture. Not a sales pitch, you know, it's just, that's something that I use. I find that I can become incredibly focused when consuming exogenous ketones. It's really good for athletic performance as well, something we can go into later if you wanted to. But no, I wasn't daunted. It was, I was really excited, to be honest. I just wish one thing that I did learn from the event was I think we didn't give the speakers a big enough window. We kept the windows incredibly small in order to put more speakers on. And I think what we should have done is concentrated on giving an hour to each speaker, because half an hour was nowhere near enough, I don't think. As you know, when we talk about this subject, you can go on and on and on. So that's one thing that I took away from that.
Interesting. I know that I had a bunch of slides that I presented. I had a whiteboard that I was looking at. I knew my outline. I practiced it. I wanted to make sure I was hitting the time. And you're right, 30 minutes is tough to be able to allow for like times for questions and things like that. It was difficult too, because the platform that you guys were on, if I was sharing my slides, I couldn't see you or Steven. So I didn't know like where the reactions were, or if you guys had questions, what the facial expressions were. So that part was a little bit challenging. But, you know, I was fortunate enough to pass the baton over to Colt Milton. I just recently hosted him on the show as well, and we talked about it on his podcast. Like, what a wonderful event, what a wonderful thing in the carnivore community. People have been talking about this, and we'll talk about this for a very long time. And so I'm just so grateful for you guys to be able to put this on and have the energy to be able to do it.
Really kind, appreciate that. I was honored to be invited to go on, and I'm super excited for next year. And I'm sure Stephen and I will be doing lots of other events and things together. But yeah, I think that was the first of its kind. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe anyone has ever gone live for 24 hours on the topic of carnivore. And the quality of the speakers, the guests that came on was absolutely incredible. There were others that we did invite to participate. We either didn't hear back, or they politely declined. So if there's anyone on there that you think, oh, you should have asked this person, we asked that person, but for whatever reason, they didn't want to take part, which is a shame. But maybe off the back of this one, and they can see how successful this was, maybe we'll get them on next year.
Yeah, sure. And with being 24 hours, it could have been people that were in parts of the world where it was like 2 a.m. or something. And that's maybe the reason why they couldn't participate. But yeah, I thought the event was wonderful. Speaking of events, you had just recently attended the PCH UK conference event. And I've attended a few conferences this year myself, Low Carb Denver 2023 and also KetoCon 2023. And I made the point before about energy is like, I've been to lots of different conferences over the course of my career as a personal trainer. And I've never been to a conference where people were alert and awake all through the entire conference, all through the afternoon, especially like that lull that you would expect at 2 p.m., 3 p.m. with most people eating a standard lunch and feeling terrible and, drifting off, falling asleep, needing a snack. Like when I looked around at Low Carb Denver in the middle of very complex, presentations that are done, everybody's just calm and paying attention and learning. And it's amazing to contrast that with other conferences that I've been to that were not low carb or ketogenic, where people are always falling asleep in the middle.
Yeah, it is absolutely incredible. And when you begin to try to explain about the benefits of being ketogenic to someone that is completely unfamiliar with it, they look at you as if you have two heads, because they don't get it. But this is, it almost seems like the magic elixir, and it is in one respect, because it can improve almost every health a marker that we you can think of. It improve athletic performance, reduce inflammation, improve insulin resistance, all of these things, and everything is connected, isn't it? As you know, but concentration, the brain loves beta hydroxybutyrate. It loves ketones. It preferences ketones even in the presence of glucose, and the brain will even use beta hydroxybutyrate in a damaged brain where the brain is insulin resistant, in a state of dementia and Alzheimer's. The brain can still utilize beta hydroxybutyrate, and this is the key to us being, this is the end of the day for me. I mean, this is it's 4:15 in the UK. I know I've been up since 6:30, working since 7, and when you work for yourself, you don't take breaks. It's not like you don't have a lunch break. If I haven't eaten yet today either, but if I was to eat, it'd be at my desk while working. So I've been working flat out. This is the end of the day to me, and I am as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as I was at 7 o'clock this morning. And in fact, when we finish this, I'm going on a 50-mile bike ride.
Of course you are.
Fasted, which when you tell people, seems absolutely outrageous. You can't ride 50 miles without food. And 50 miles, to be honest, when you've been riding for a few months, isn't even that far, but it's when you try explaining this or telling people about the foods that we eat and the benefits, they do look at you as if you are talking at the gibberish. But yeah, you're right. It's this concentration that you get is absolutely unparalleled. And I noticed a similar thing at the PHC conference. Everybody was super engrossed in the presentations. They were all taking in the information that was being presented. And during the breaks, everybody was networking and talking and busy. There was you didn't look around and look at anybody yawning and drifting off and with glazed eyes, which is incredible. But yeah, there's certainly no going back for me. I mean, I could never go back to being fueled by glucose again. This is it's absolutely life-changing.
It's so much better. Yeah. And just like you said, like to go out for long bike rides and not need anything, to not even really think about it or even like need a water bottle. It's really amazing. It's such a contrast to, especially when I was competing in cycling, where you just needed so many carbohydrates all the time. I would love to talk about exogenous ketones with you. I think the timing is great too, because the Tour de France is wrapping up as, we're speaking here. This will be, fully done by the time this episode comes out. But we know that a lot of professional cyclists and cycling teams have discovered the benefits of taking exogenous ketones. So let's definitely talk about that. But before we do, let's hear your amazing story. You have an incredible story, like we alluded to in the introduction, about how you overcame poor health and a complete 180, I would say, as far as health and not only health, but also performance and fitness and transforming yourself into a bodybuilder. So can you talk about your transformation and how you were able to get past your poor health?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you. Very kind of you to say so as well. It's been a journey. So the short version is that in my mid to late 20s, I was clinically obese. I was type 2 diabetic. I suffered with chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains. I suffered with skin issues. I was covered in acne. My back was always covered. My face would come up in boils. And any pictures that you would see of me, were me looking my best. And believe it or not, I used to put makeup on. I used to wear concealer to hide these boils and spots. Which is a bit embarrassing for a guy to admit to, which I don't anymore, by the way.
You look good.
But I could not walk up the stairs without stopping or being severely out of breath. And I was told by my doctor that it was a fact of life. I was going to be on medication for the rest of my life. The worst thing for me were the migraines. So I used to suffer with these severe, daily debilitating migraines that would make me blind, for which I was on 3 different medications for. If a migraine attack came on, which they would every day, so I'd be taking every day. I had a headache continuously, and it felt like somebody was banging on my skull 24 hours a day. But I became used to this, to the point that if I shook my head, my head would be in agony. But it's something that I just became accustomed to. But the migraine attacks would come on daily. So I was on 2 different medications to keep these at bay. But when they came on, I had emergency sort of medication to take to prevent it. But if that didn't work, or I was late taking that medication, my vision would go within 20 minutes to 30 minutes. So it'd begin with a little dot, like a floaty that you see in your eye. It would begin like this, and it'd look like a little flashing light. And it would grow until my right side, my vision in my right eye was completely covered, and then it would transition into the left. And it would be as if I was looking through frosted glass. So you can see shapes and movements, but you can't make. So I would look at you, and I could see that there's a silhouette of a person there, but I would not be able to tell who that person was.
Wow.
I'd be incredibly sick, physically sick, and I'd be bedridden for 3 days. Now, the only advantage to doing this was my hearing would become incredibly enhanced, which when you have a migraine and you can hear creaks and things and bangs isn't preference. But if you could take that spidey sense and bring it into your daily life, I would have been Spider-Man, but it, unfortunately, I could never do that one. But it, that was the worst for me. It was absolutely debilitating. And I was just told to accept that it was a fact of life. Through vanity, I decided to look a bit deeper. So my belly was, considerably further out than my chest. And I thought that if I can reduce the bloat in my belly, and have my chest predominated slightly further than my belly, then I would feel a little bit better and I would look not as obese. So I knew the bread bloated me. So I took bread out of my diet. And it did. Within a couple of days, the bloat went away. Within the first month, I lost 28 pounds, so 2 stone in them. And I wasn't dieting, but I used to eat a lot of bread. I'd wake up and I'd have toast in the mornings, toast and cereal, or both. I would, I'd have bread and butter with everything that I was eating. I'd eat sandwiches in between meals. Excuse me. Whatever it was, I would be eating bread, and it would be brown bread because brown bread is healthier, right? It isn't, by the way. So I took bread out and I lost 2 stone, and I felt better. I felt, pretty good. A friend of mine, Jonathan Davis, mentioned to me about being in ketosis. So I looked into this and discovered what it was. I tested using the urine test strips, and I was not producing ketones because I was still eating lots of other carbohydrates from foods that you would not even think consumed carbohydrates. I've always regarded myself as being not a stupid person. I don't want to say intelligent, but I've sharper than the average tool in the box. But I was unaware that certain vegetables contained lots of carbohydrates, and I also was not aware that all carbohydrates break down into sugar. So the correlation between carbohydrates and sugar, all carbs is sugar. Carbs equals sugar. I was not aware of this. I thought fruit was incredibly good for me. I thought, my potatoes, my pasta, my rice, I thought all these things, because this is what we're told, chicken and pasta, chicken and rice. I thought all these things are incredibly healthy. So I went through phases in my life where I would eat junk food. I'm a food addict. I'm still a food addict. I'm addicted to food. I love eating food. I love my food. I've just changed the type of food that I'm addicted to. But I did actively try to eat foods that I believed were healthy. So I'd eat my muesli in the morning. I'd consume my chicken and pasta. I was eating my green veg and all this sort of stuff. But I gained more weight. I became more unhealthy. So when I took the bread out, I realized that, well, something is wrong here in regards to what we are told about nutrition. So after that conversation with my friend, I started looking at other foods that contain carbohydrates, and I actively began lowering carbohydrates. And then this led to the two worst weeks of my life. I had what's known as keto flu, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know what that is. I didn't know what it was because I began my journey 11 years ago. There was very little information on the web available anywhere in the world, but what was available was predominantly from the States, very little in the UK. So I didn't know what was going on, and I went through the two worst weeks of my life, to the point where I said to my wife when I went to bed one night, I feel incredibly ill. I think I'm going to die. And I genuinely meant this, because I was craving sugar so much. My body was hurting. I felt incredibly unwell, but I could not face being, the way that I was. I could not face living the life that I was living and being depressed and suffering with anxiety. And this was almost something that I was willing to face head on. And if this didn't work, then I didn't really want to be in the world anymore. And as bad as that is to sound, when you say it, that was the reality. I went to bed. I didn't die. I'm here speaking with you today. Really? At least I think not anyway. I woke up the next day and I felt absolutely incredible. I felt like $1 million, the best that I had ever felt. And the thing with this is that the longer I abstained from carbohydrates, the better I felt. These improvements, these benefits kept on giving and giving and giving. At month 2 and 3, I hit a new level. At month 6, at month 9, all the way up to 12 months in, I was still reaping benefits from being low carb ketogenic. And then I began studying and educating myself in the world of real nutrition. Well, why are we told these things are bad for us? Because I went back to my doctor, and my doctor said, look, you've reversed your diabetes. This is incredible. But you still need to come away from this diet. You can't live on these saturated fats. You can't consume this amount of protein. Red meat leads to cancer. Salt is bad for you. You're going to die if you. And wait a minute. I've just reversed all of these illnesses that you told me that I was going to suffer with all of my life, and now you're telling me to come away. So I haven't been back to the doctor since. I decided to do my own research. I retrained as a nutritionist, despite everything they taught me being incorrect. It was a hoop that I needed to jump through. But I began looking at clinical trials and research papers and studies, and and it's a rabbit hole. The deeper you go, the more you learn, the more information contradicts each other, but you take apart these studies and these papers, and eventually you come to a level where you have an incredible understanding on health, well-being, and nutrition. And this is where I am now, and it basically allowed me to progress from one of the other big factors that limiting factors within my life was depression and anxiety. And for anyone who's listening who has suffered with this, this is a real thing. It gets dumbed down quite often within society, but it is all consuming. It takes over your entire life, to the point where my life was spent living in boxes. So I would be in my house, my box. I would leave my box and walk 2 feet away on my drive into my car, into my metal box. I would drive this metal box to a big box, which was my place of work. And then I'd walk inside this big box, and I would spend my day sitting inside a little box inside this bigger box. And then I would perform this in reverse and go home. I would not go outside. I wouldn't go shopping. I wouldn't do anything outside of the house. I couldn't go anywhere by myself. So anywhere that I went, my wife would come with me. I wouldn't walk to the shop by myself. I wouldn't go shopping by myself. At any time that I had to leave the house, I would need my safety blanket. My wife and I had our daughter, Summer, our little girl, and I didn't want her to see this. I didn't want her to grow up being this way either. But changing my diet, changing my lifestyle, changed the way that I looked at the world. I was no longer depressed. My anxiety was, I don't think you can ever get rid of anxiety. I think it's a spectrum, but I was able to squash it into a ball and throw it over my shoulder and forget it was even there. I would not be speaking with you today. I now give talks in front of hundreds and thousands of people. The Carnivore-a-thon went out, to tens of thousands of views so far. I don't know how many people we had live at any one point, but I could not have done that on carbohydrates. And people think that you are absolutely crazy when you tell them this, but the food we eat affects the neurotransmitters in the brain. The food we eat changes the way that we see things. It changes how we feel. We need certain neurotransmitters in the brain. This is what helps us feel the way that we do. It helps us feel good. The catecholaminergic neurotransmitters within the brain need specific cofactors, which when we live a standard diet, if you like, these cofactors are unable to be synthesized through the foods we eat. They're blocked by things like lectins and phytic acid, and these cofactors are not produced, and it leads to a deficiency of things like dopamine. So then we begin chasing dopamine. Now, there's a few things that can give us a dopamine hit. Procreation is one, and then sweet foods is another. And if we are devoid of these things, we go chasing these things. And sweet food is an easy fix, isn't it? And it's not just sweet foods. I say sweet foods. It could be it's sugar. And sugar, as we know, as we just established, comes from carbohydrates. So this could be, fast food. It could be a burger and fries. It could be a pizza. It could be candy. It could be any of these things. But you end up eating these. But this fix is short-lived. This fix is incredibly short-lived. So you repeat it again and again and again, and then you become more depressed, you become more anxious, and it's a slippery slope. So everything that we put into our body has a massive effect on how we feel, how we perceive and look within the world. Living this way has completely changed my life. And I went on from being a nobody, if you like, not that I'm a somebody now by any means, but I began training again. So I've always trained in my life, but I never made any progress. I got to a certain physique, but I was still obese. I was still fat, which to me wasn't fine because I wasn't happy. Living this lifestyle, man, allowed me to reverse this. I began training. I began building muscle quicker than I'd ever built muscle before. I became fitter than I'd ever felt before. I'd had less body fat than I'd ever felt before. And then I decided to compete as an amateur in men's physique bodybuilding. Now, this is competing in men's physique bodybuilding. You need to be on stage in essentially your pants. So for someone who suffers severely with anxiety, this was, I wouldn't do a public speaking event. I know I'd be hard pushed to do a talk in a friend's wedding, give a speech in front of a room full of people if I had to, let alone go on stage with no clothes on, because I hate my body. I still don't like the way I look now. And that's not me, saying to people that you should love the way that you look, you should love the person that you are. But I'm a lot happier. But I'm always in pursuit of looking and feeling better. But where I am now is considerably, well down the line, much further down the line than I ever was before. But so the thought of setting foot on stage was incredibly unthought of between friends and family, to the point where they begged me not to do this competition.
Wow.
But I told everybody that I was doing it because I knew that once I had told them, I would not back out. So I worked my butt off training in the gym. I stuck to the diet, which was hard in the beginning. You know, it's a lifestyle for me now, and I find it incredibly easy, and I love the food I eat. But back then, the sugar addiction was still rife. I was still tempted by all these other foods, but I stuck to it because I knew that I told everybody that I would not deviate from this, and I did. I competed, and I came second in this competition, which was incredible. And then I thought, I want to do this again. So I went back the next year, and I was placed again. I think I competed in two different classes. I came second and third. I think it was that year that I was awarded pro status. If not that year, it was the year later. Then I went back competing as a pro, and I was never unplaced. So every time I went back, my physique was better. I was bigger. I was leaner. I was drier. I was more vascular. But the competition, because I went back, I was competing at a higher level every time. So I was always just being placed. And the first competition I ever won was the Middlesbrough Championship. I competed there. I won the Middlesbrough Championship. And at the end of these competitions, they put on, pizzas and cakes and donuts and whatever you want is there to eat. I was the only athlete that did not indulge in any pizza or cake. And I'm not saying that you're not allowed, you can't do these things, but the British Championship was the following Sunday. It was a week after. I knew that if I had eaten any food, as far as junk food, between that day and the British Championship, that I would not be taking the best package. So I abstained. I was the only one, and it was incredibly hard. This stuff is free, and there's pizzas everywhere, donuts, calling to you, but I abstained. I went back a week later, and I won the British Championship. So the first comp I ever won was at a pro level. I'd never won as an amateur. I was awarded pro status on a third position, which in my federation, I think I was the first person to be ever awarded a pro card for a third place. I never won as an amateur. My first comp I ever won was at a pro level. Then I won the British Championship. Then I went back competing at a pro level, and 2 years later, I won the European Championship, which was May last year. And now I've retired from competing. And I've decided, as you rightly say, to go into currently duathlons. So I'm running and cycling. I've never really done any running since I was in school, bar the odd park run. But, I probably did 5 park runs in a year. So I don't think you can class that as actively running. Never ridden a bike since I was in school, and I'd never ridden a road bike, which is completely different to riding, a mountain bike and playing in the street, So these are 2 things that I'd started from scratch last October. So that's when I started. And I still haven't started to learn how to swim. So there's 3 disciplines there that I'm completely new to. So swimming is the next one on the list, but I want to improve as much as I can on the running and cycling first. But I've retired from the bodybuilding for various reasons. We can go into those if you wanted to, but that's that's the short version of my story.
That is absolutely amazing. What an amazing story. As a cyclist, we call triathlons a cycling shit sandwich. So for me, I would say skip the swimming, don't even get into it, and spend more time on the bike than you do on the run. Cycling's where it's at, my friend. Dude, yeah. What an amazing story. That's fantastic. And, in the past, obviously, as a nutrition coach and a personal trainer, I've always recommended that people eat lots of grains, lots of vegetables, and that kind of thing. And that kind of transition into, okay, wait a second, maybe these things might be optional. But can you maybe tell people why plant foods, especially our sacred cow plant foods, no pun intended, the spinach, the broccoli, the kale, can you tell us why those things aren't even like neutral foods? There actually is some harm that can come from eating some of those foods?
Yeah, for sure. So, let's look at grains, for example. Grains contain a carbohydrate binding protein called lectins. We're all familiar with a lectin in the form of gluten, but gluten isn't the only lectin, and arguably not the most damaging, although it is incredibly damaging. So there are lots of other foods contain lectins in the form of wheat germ agglutinin and phytohemagglutinin, which is found in plants. But what these lectins do is they bind the enterocytes, the epithelial cells lining the gut. They cause the release of a molecule called zonulin, and zonulin release causes a gap in the tight junction between the epithelial cells lining the gut. Now, the epithelial cells are 1 cell thick, Their job is to protect our insides against these external toxins. So they've got an incredibly big job for something that's so small. The last thing we want is gaps or holes in the tight junction between these cells. And that's what lectins do. They cause gaps in there. And this allows undigested protein molecules to travel into the bloodstream where they shouldn't be. So the body creates antibodies to fight them. And then through a process called molecular mimicry, the body starts attacking other proteins in the body that look the same. And this is autoimmune disease. So anyone you know who suffers with an autoimmune issue, it comes from intestinal permeability. And in most people, it comes from the grains that they consume or the lectins that they consume. So when in regards to health and well-being, healing the gut is job number one. Now, what are we told to consume to be fit and healthy? When we look at the food pyramid or the eat well plate, it predominates in grains. You know, these we're told to consume muesli for breakfast. So, I mean, we're not even talking carbohydrate yet. Yet we know that there is a downside to carbohydrate, which is something we'll go on to now. But these foods contain these lectins. They damage the gut. Once we have intestinal permeability, you know, we're in a whole world of pain, because this can manifest itself as skin conditions, arthritic pains. It could be IBS. You know, this goes there. Any autoimmune disease you can think of, this is where it comes from. And grains are the main contributing factor. Now, there are other factors, but the biggest bang for your buck is going to be removing these grains. Now, as well as these carbohydrate binding proteins, generally these foods are high in carbohydrate. Excess carbohydrates leads to insulin resistance. So we are not meant to be fueled by glucose. So this overconsumption of carbohydrates day on day leads to the pancreas being unable to upregulate the amount of insulin that it releases to drive the glucose into cells. So it leads to insulin resistance. Now, when we look at weight gain, we can't store fat without insulin. So insulin is a storing hormone, and it wants to store fat. So when we consume carbohydrate, the pancreas releases insulin. It upregulates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which breaks the bonds on the glycerol backbone and sends fat into the fat cell. It's biologically impossible for us to burn fat when insulin is elevated. So when we consume carbs before we go for a run, so say we wake up in the morning and we think, oh, I'm going to go for a run today, and I'm going to burn some calories because I want to lose a bit of weight. But I need some cereal. I need fuel to do that. So I'm going to have some cereal. Brilliant. I've had my cereal. I've had some fruit on my cereal. So I'm all carbed up, ready for my run. Now, what this does is this creates the release of insulin, because insulin needs to drive this glucose into the cell. Now, when insulin is elevated, you are not burning fat for fuel. When insulin is elevated, it is biologically impossible to burn fat for fuel. Because it blocks, when insulin is elevated, it blocks another enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase, which is what we need to break the bonds on the glycerol backbone to release these fatty acids into the bloodstream. So the issue with that is, over time, we become insulin resistant. And instead of insulin coming up and coming straight back down, it almost has a mounting effect. So insulin is elevated for a lot longer, and now we're in fat storage mode for a longer period of time. So it goes away from calorie counting, because energy needs to be accounted for. And I use the term energy over calories because the caloric model is highly flawed. It doesn't account for the effect of insulin, doesn't account for the thermic effect of food, metabolic rate, and ketogenesis, and amongst other things. But this effect on insulin is what drives this fat storage. Now, the lectins in the food that we eat bind to insulin receptors in the cell, and they signal the body to store 5 times more fat than insulin does itself. So the caloric value from the cereal that you were consuming in the morning, or bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, whatever it may be, potatoes contain lectins as well, as along with lots of other things which we can go into if you like. But these bind to the insulin receptors, and they signal the body to store 5 times more fat. So to put that into perspective, if the same person were to eat a meal that contained 500 calories from grains, from muesli or cereal, and 500 calories from steak and eggs, themselves, that person that's containing or consuming the steak and eggs is going to store 5 times less fat than that person consuming the cereal. So it goes well beyond, the calories. And my research over the years led me to look into the effect of metabolic rate, and this is one of the other elements. when we consume low carbohydrate, this increases metabolic rate, which means despite consuming the same amount of calories as our counterpart, we burn considerably more energy. When we eat more protein, this increases the thermic effect. So it costs the body around 25 to 35% of its calories to digest, absorb, and process that protein, compared to 0 to 5 on fat and 5 to 10 on carbs. So the more protein, the more energy, and I use the term energy over calories, as I said, because it's not calories that governs whether we gain or lose weight. When we look at the caloric value or the energy value, from protein, the more we eat from protein and the less from carbohydrate, the higher the thermic effect, to a point. So all of these things coupled together, going low carb, consuming more meat, avoiding lectins, those are the three biggest things. Now, we haven't even got into being ketogenic or carnivore at this point. Now, being ketogenic, which when we are carnivore, we are in the metabolic state of ketosis. Now, there's always, this food within the community, I'm carnivore, I'm not keto. If you were carnivore, you were in the metabolic state of ketosis. You're still, carnivore is a subsection of being ketogenic. It's the elite of being in a ketogenic state. So we are producing ketones. The production of ketones uncouples, it uncouples something called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1. It signals our white fat, which wants to store, in order to act the way the brown fat does. And brown fat wants to waste energy. So we increase UCP1, uncoupling protein 1, and we tell our stored fat just to waste energy. So now we have this whole other amount of energy that the body is just wasting because we are burning energy from the fat cell, which we can't account for. So when we put all these things together, we lose weight incredibly quickly. We manage to reverse a whole host of health outcomes, because insulin resistance and inflammation are the two driving factors of every illness and disease that we know of. So when we begin to remove the grains from our diet, which are high in carbohydrate, and then we come on to the seed oils, so vegetable oils, which are high in an oxidized omega-6 called linoleic acid. Now, linoleic acid increases insulin resistance at a 6% higher rate than even carbohydrates do. So the biggest bang for our buck would be to remove these vegetable oils that we're told are good for us and we're told are heart healthy. These seed oils are not good for us. They're not heart healthy. I would argue that they are one of the two main driving factors in regards to cardiovascular disease. They damage our healthy LDL particles and convert them into Pattern-B LDL particles, which are the damaged particles. This excess consumption of carbohydrates causes oxidation to the cells. So between oxidation and glycation, the glucose causes glycation, which is when the cells become sticky. So this process of glycation and oxidation between these foods that we're eating leads to all of these deleterious downstream effects of ill health. We can start looking at vegetables. I don't know how deep you want me to go into this, because it's a rabbit hole, but I used to consume smoothies every morning, even on my keto journey. I used to consume kale and spinach smoothies, which I'd add my turmeric to and black pepper. Now I'm carnivore, and I'm quite a strict carnivore. I would argue possibly, up there with the strictest in the world. Although not the strictest, I do know carnivores out there who are more strict than myself. But in terms of when we compare this to low carb and being ketogenic, I'm incredibly strict. But that doesn't mean that I don't advocate low carb, even dirty keto, because any gravitation into lowering carbohydrates, you're going to see a benefit. Any gravitation into removing seed oils. And I would argue that removing the grains and seed oils are going to see the biggest impact anyway. So if there's only two things you can do to improve health, is to take these out of your diet. And then we look into So carbohydrate is number 4 on my list, actually, after grains and seed oils, and making sure you get plenty of salt. Carbohydrates are number 4. But, and that's not even getting into keto and carnivore. But as you gravitate down this list, then, you become, the deeper down the rabbit hole you go, the healthier and better that you will feel. But I support anyone that wants to work with any area of this. I don't expect people, that I speak to and work with to become carnivore. I just like to educate them into the damage that these foods are causing. And then it's up to that individual to decide on where they want to reside on that path. If you can go as deep down this path as you want, if you're happy at the first stage, then that's fine. And if you are suffering with other issues like arthritic pains or kidney problems, this is when I would say to them, well, let's look at the food you're eating, the plants. Let's look at the oxalates. Spinach is incredibly high in oxalates. Turmeric, which we are told to consume to alleviate joint pain, is incredibly high in oxalates. It's these oxalates that are causing those problems. So we are adding more oxalates to the problem. The body tries to excrete these toxins through phase 2 detoxification in the liver. Glucuronosyl transferase binds these to glucoraphanin and tries to excrete it from the body. But when we consume black pepper, it blocks glucuronosyl transferase. It blocks our body's ability through phase 2 detoxification to take it out of the liver. So we think that we're helping the body absorb more, but what we're actually doing is preventing the body from excreting this toxin. So adding black pepper to your turmeric and your spinach smoothies is absolutely counterintuitive to health and well-being, especially if you suffer with kidney stones or arthritic pains, which is something that I did early on in my journey. So when I was ketogenic, I used to consume my spinach smoothies with my kale and black pepper and turmeric. And, these are things that I've learned as I've gravitated deeper down. But all plants contain toxins. They contain phytoalexins, plant toxins that are fighting for survival. They're there to protect the plant. As human beings, we can run away or we can fight. And it's the same with any other animal within the kingdom. They can fight back or they can run away. A plant doesn't have that option. It's rooted to the ground. So their defense mechanism is these plant toxins. All plants contain these phytoalexins, which are toxic to humans. And, as you've heard from one of the podcasts that I was lucky enough to be on with Dr. Anthony Chaffee recently, he goes into detail in regards to how much carcinogens are actually found within plants that we consume every day. Every plant in the supermarket contains at least 56 known carcinogens, which are, cancer causing to human beings. 56, yet we are told to consume these predominantly on our plate. And I'm not telling, any of the listeners out there that any of the followers you have not to consume these foods, but because consuming these are going to be considerably healthier than eating grains, and consuming these is going to be considerably healthier than eating processed foods. But again, it comes to where you want to sit on this ladder. But I truly believe that the healthiest way to live is being ketogenic. And the elite end of that is being carnivore. So I'm predominantly, or I am animal based. I consume meat, eggs even, fish and cheese. So I do consume cheese. I don't consider cheese to be dairy. And I know that may sound silly to some people, but I don't drink milk because of the casein content and the lactose. But when we create cheese, it's treated with enzymes like rennet, which take a lot of these out. So what you find with people who can't consume milk, they can consume cheese. And this proper cheese doesn't contain any casein. And it's this casein in the milk that will lead to intestinal permeability. Even in A2 milk or raw milk that a lot of people within the movement are consuming, this still causes intestinal permeability at a much lower level. But again, it comes back to where you want to sit, on this ladder or this path. But what I try to do is educate people and say, well, look, this is what all of these things cause. This is better than this is better than that. But as long as you understand, that these things cause these issues, then, you can make an educated decision every day. One of the biggest things for me recently is coffee. Now, I love drinking coffee. I still love drinking coffee. But coffee, we know, contains caffeine, and caffeine can have a negative impact on cortisol. But besides that, it's high in a compound called acrylamide. Acrylamide is a known carcinogen, and it's accumulative. It can cause inflammation and serious issues within the body if we consume it on a regular basis. But this is exactly what we do with coffee. We wake up in the morning, we have a cup of coffee, then we have another cup of coffee, then we have and some days I still do this. And if Dr. Chafee is listening, he'd probably be pulling his teeth out listening to this. But I'm not going to lie about my way of life. I have massively reduced the volume of coffee that I consume after coming across this research. But I still love drinking coffee, but I've reduced the volume. So some days I won't drink coffee. I'll go weeks without coffee. But if I want one, I'll have one. And my thinking behind this is that, I'm at least with removing the cumulative effect. But my body can cope with a little bit of coffee, but Dr. Chafee's can't, because when he puts coffee in, he has inflammation and sore joints and muscles immediately. It doesn't have that effect on me. So, I still keep it in occasionally. So it's finding what works for you, listening to your body, and adjusting to that, but it, I love the way I get to eat steak and eggs every day.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? It's amazing. It's amazing. That's what I tell people. Like, start with one meal. Start with just a meal of steak and eggs. You're not going to die. You're probably going to feel great. It's going to be delicious. Like, why not? Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey into endurance sport, how being in ketosis helps you in sports that people normally will tell you have to be eating a tremendous amount of carbohydrates. And on top of that, how can taking exogenous ketones help enhance your endurance and performance?
Perfect. So when we look at endurance, for example, even carb athletes, they flick into something called the fat burning zone, which is the zone that you and I are in constantly. Our bodies are constantly burning fat for fuel. So we don't need to flick into this zone because we're already in there. Now, when we look at studies who compare a carbohydrate athlete to a keto athlete, these are done on keto athletes who have just started their journey and have quite literally been ketogenic for 3 or 4 weeks. But it takes time for the body to adapt. It takes time to upregulate things like the monocarboxylate transporters and enzymes within the body, and CPT1 carnitine palmitoyl transferase, the body's ability to put the fat and convert the fat into ketones in the liver and send the ketones to the cells. It takes a lot of time. And we know this because when we begin a ketogenic journey, we waste ketones in the form of acetoacetate and acetone. But as you adapt, the ketone levels in the blood in that form become lower, and your body will utilize and benefit from beta hydroxybutyrate. So as you adapt in, your body is constantly in fat burning zone. So you can run all day long, as long as your joints and ligaments and things can take it. You can ride all day long, as long as your bum can take it, and because that does take a bit of getting used to.
Valid point.
Yeah. So it's the furthest ride that I've ever done is 80 mile, which isn't an awful long distance compared to some of the riders out there. But I've literally been riding for a few months. Now, when I did that ride, it was over 3,500 foot of elevation. I did the ride with a group of people who. You there? There we
are. Man, yeah.
Back.
So sorry, didn't know what happened.
Yeah, and sure what happened, Dad. It just disappeared. But
no worries. I'll edit it later. We were right at the spot that you were saying you did the ride with a group of people, and that's when it kind of paused.
So I did the ride there with a group of Ironman athletes. So incredibly fit group of people who have competed in Ironman for an awful long time. Now we covered 80 miles. I'd stepped up from 45, so it was a big step up on the distance that I'd ridden prior to that. My average moving speed was, I think it was 18.8 or 18.9 miles an hour, over 3,500 foot of elevation, which is pretty good, I think. Now, I had the highest average moving speed out of all of the guys in the group. These guys were constantly consuming carbohydrate and energy gels. They had 3 or 4 bottles of water with energy, pre-workout and energy in there. I did the whole 80 miles on 1 bottle of water that that contained electrolytes and MCT powder. I did the 80 miles, as I said, I had the highest average moving speed. And towards the end of the miles, the 80 miles, when they were beginning to bonk, I was still not suffering with any form of fatigue. Now, take from that what you will, but to me, that showed that you can travel at a high intensity for an incredibly long period of time. Now, this weekend, I am riding an Ironman distance. I'm going to be doing 112 miles. Nice. I'm going to take three bottles of water. So, I'll let you know how that gets on. But one of the criticisms that I heard recently within like the group that I'm part of is that a lot of the athletes will bonk. And I said, well, I've never bonked in my life. I'm never short of energy. What stops me is my ligaments, my joints, my tendons, because I'm not used to running for that period of time. My legs are not used to the riding in the neuromuscular zone. So there's a big adaptation process which needs to go on when you're running and cycling. So, and when I did that run, that was, I believe, my 10th run that I had ever done outside before. So that was my 10th ride, on a bike. 10th ride ever, if not less than that. But I'm sure it was the 10th ride actually. So I did 80 miles on my 10th ride at the highest average moving speed on one bottle of water, 19.9, I think it was, over 3,500 foot of elevation, which is, pretty generous, I think, for someone who's new to cycling.
That's great.
And I'm working with an athlete currently who is an amateur athlete. He's 22 years of age. He's about 2 or 3 months into keto adaptation. He competed at a pro level in France recently, not in the Tour de France, in Europe, sorry. I don't know where it was. I can't remember where it was, but he competed for 4 hours. He rode, I believe it was at 368 watts for 4 hours.
Insane.
Incredible. At 91% of his VO2 max. Now, for any of the athletes out there that understand that, that is absolutely incredible. He did that entire ride on my electrolytes, which we produce, MCT powder, C8 powder, and exogenous ketones. And the reason that we can do this is that a carb athlete will store energy as glycogen. A carb athlete at a 6% body fat will store around 10,000 kilojoules of energy. And the same athlete at a 6% body fat being ketogenic will store 150,000 kilojoules of energy, 15 times more energy stored in body fat than a carb athlete. Plus, that carb athlete needs to carb load in order to put those carbs in. Now, what happens when you put carbs in? For every 1 gram of glycogen stored, we will store 2, 3, maybe 4 grams of water. Which means to fully carb load, that athlete could be carrying half a stone more weight than their ketogenic counterpart. Now, when you were running and cycling, we're all buying these super expensive bikes because they're a couple of grams lighter than the other competitor. We're all looking for the lightest running vests or the lightest trainers to run in. The biggest gain that you were going to get is in your body weight, the weight that you need to carry. If you didn't have to carry that glycogen within your body wouldn't hold on to as much water. You could be 7 to 10 pound lighter. What difference does that make on the run and the bike? That difference is going to be incredible. Now,
huge.
The argument is huge. The argument from the carb community is that, well, you need muscle glycogen for energy on high intensity parts of workouts and competition, which is true. But when you're doing an endurance exercise, you're very rarely hitting that zone anyway. But, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, is that when you are keto adapted, your body will still store glycogen. So as a carb athlete, my body will still store glycogen in my muscle. And arguably at a higher rate, because what the body has the ability to do when we're ketogenic and adapted is that it will send lactate. So not lactic acid. Lactic acid does not exist in the human body, but this is how we refer to it. It's lactate. Now, lactate is there to buffer hydrogen ions, which means that if you suffer with lactic acid burn, which is what is called lactate burn, it means that your muscles are inefficient. Now, what you'll find when you are ketogenic is that you don't get this burn, because the body has the ability, when you're adapted, to shuttle this lactate to the liver, where the liver will convert it into glycogen and send it back to the muscle at a higher level, if not equal to, than a carb athlete. So I will produce glycogen at the same, if not higher level than a carb athlete without having to consume carbohydrates. Now, I wore a continuous blood glucose monitor recently for a 10K run. Now, what you'd expect to see initially when an athlete runs is an increase in blood glucose because the glycogen is released from the muscle. So there's an increase, but then this is quickly used up. So you will see this dissipating incredibly quickly. And this is where athletes will become hypoglycemic. And this is why they take energy gels and carbohydrates. After this 10K run, which was around 40 minutes, give or take, I checked my blood glucose. My blood glucose. Now, I do not consume carbohydrates. Therefore, I should not have any blood glucose in my body going by the standard way of thinking because I don't store glycogen. I don't eat carbohydrates. Before the run, before the race, my blood glucose was 3.8. After the race, it was 10.6, I believe. And so basically, I've just created a ton of glucose in my body from nothing. I had higher blood glucose levels than my brother, who is not ketogenic. His was on the decline. Mine was still up there, if not continuing to increase, which is proof positive to me that not only did my body have the ability to create glucose, but it maintained the glucose that I needed at a high level at over, I think I was competing at 92% of VO2 max in that run. So competing at a high intensity, my body created glucose from nothing. And it does so because the body is incredibly clever. The body will create glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, and it will create glucose through, or glycogen through the lactate within the body when the energy calls upon it. And I do this carrying a lot less weight within my body, so I can be incredibly lean, light on my feet. I don't need to eat before I run. I think the thought of, you see these people consuming food before, there's nothing more uncomfortable than running with a belly full of food. I just don't understand it. And I've been running incredibly short period of time. My best 5K, and this isn't setting the world on fire by any means, but I've quite literally been running months. My fastest 5K time is 18:45.
It's impressive.
Yeah, you know, it's not, that's not hanging around, is it? You know, my fastest half marathon was 1 hour 33. And I know that I'm capable of a sub 1:30 because for 5 miles of that race, I hung back with a friend of mine because he was struggling. And then I kicked on after and gained. So I know that I'm capable of, but take it as it is if you want, 1:33. And that was the second time I'd ever even ran a half marathon. You know, I've ridden 80 miles at 19.9, whatever it is, on a 3,500 foot of elevation. So I can, and when we look at, for all of the athletes who are listening, who follow Strava segments, there's something called KOMs, King of the Mountains. Now, there's segments everywhere you ride where somebody has the highest speed. They've done a segment in the fastest time. On a lot of segments local to me, with tens of thousands of really good athletes who train on these areas. I'm number one in this year on some of them, number one. And there's some incredible athletes on there. So number one this year, and I'm in the top 10 of all time on some of these segments. Now that is incredible. So that's another argument that people say, well, you need carbohydrates for the explosive movements. You don't. You do not hit carb. It's phosphocreatine. It's the creatine, the phosphocreatine energy system that allows us that explosive movement. You do not touch the glycolytic energy system until maybe after 30 seconds. And this is debatable. I mean, you know, it could be 10 up to 30 seconds and depending on whether you're supplementing with creatine monohydrate. But I do. And I can supply energy to that system for a long period of time. But then we've just broken down the whole glycolytic energy system anyway, because my body can utilize glucose or glycogen. And some of these are 10, 20 seconds long, and some of these segments are 2 minutes. And I'm scored incredibly high. I'm up there with some incredible athletes on the list local to me. But yet it falls on deaf ears. You tell people locally about the benefits of being ketogenic and the benefits of ketones. And it's like, no, so-and-so on telly says blah, blah, blah. Well, you need to ask yourself, why are they taking pictures of the food they eat? Why are they telling you that they're on carbohydrates? If you were an elite athlete and you had something that was giving you an advantage, over everybody else, are you going to tell them this is what I eat before my race? Or are you more likely inclined to show somebody an image of food to put them off what you were doing? And I'm not saying that's what the athletes are doing, but that's what I would do for certain if I was competing and didn't want to promote the lifestyle. But as you rightly say, almost every team, if not every team in the Tour de France, supplements with exogenous ketones, because my body creates them naturally, your body creates them naturally. But even a carbohydrate athlete who supplements with exogenous ketones will benefit from the supplementation from those ketones, because a carb athlete is not metabolically flexible, which means they can only use predominantly glucose for fuel. They're inefficiently using fat when it gets into the fat burning zone. But beta hydroxybutyrate, exogenously, which means taken orally or from outside the body, will still take preference within the body. It will still be preferenced for energy over glucose. So a carb athlete who is just filled up with glycogen for their long ride, who takes exogenous ketones, the body will preferentially use the ketones over the glucose, meaning that when it comes to that time their body needs the glucose, it's still stored in their muscle as glycogen, which means they can hit the fat burning zone and they can ride a lot longer without having to bonk, because they are preserving their glycogen levels. Even one shot of MCT oil or powder can preserve glycose stores for up to an hour, depending on intensity, which is absolutely incredible. And ketones do this at an incredible level. Your body does this, my body does this, but I still take ketones. I take ketones for mental clarity, because even though I'm up there, it puts me up there. I take them on a daily basis for cognition. So coming on, so this is what I've got. This is what I'm drinking now, is exogenous ketones. So I'm firing on all cylinders. I'm completely compos mentis. I can think of big, long words that maybe I couldn't if I was tired. And I can compete at a high level for a long period of time. Now, we do this naturally, but the ketones will help even a carb athlete. And arguably, they will benefit more as a percentage. So if you were to take the same person and they were at this level on carbohydrate, when they're ketogenic, they're up there. They compete at a much higher level. But when you take ketones, it might do that. But if you're a carb athlete and you take ketones, it's going to increase your athletic performance incredibly. So as a percentage, a carb athlete will benefit more than an adapted keto athlete would through the supplementation, because their body's already using it. So carb athletes will benefit more from exogenous ketones. Now, it will help with energy, mental clarity, focus. So your vision and your concentration is pinpoint. So when you're taking these fast corners or you're thinking of things, your brain is firing on all cylinders. But it also helps with recovery, because it reduces inflammation. It blocks a pathway called NLRP3 inflammasome. So it helps with recovery. It also, taken after the event, will increase EPO. So EPO is something that, and they'll do this naturally, which is different to supplementing with EPO, which, and it can be, you can see this, the body, when tested, it's different from exogenous EPO. So you've got obviously EPO is illegal in supplementation within professional sport. And as we know, a lot of pro athletes were using this years ago. Which I'm not against, by the way, because all of these athletes, I think, Lance Armstrong going off kilter a little bit, was unfairly hit with this, I believe, because everybody else was taking these supplements.
Everybody.
So he was only doing things that everybody else was doing. So to me, that's a level playing field. But anyway, I don't think he should have had his titles, his medals stripped. But irrespective of that, there is a benefit to EPO. The BHB taken after will increase EPO naturally, which is different to exogenous supplementation, which is going to improve your performance. So from all of these standpoints, exogenous ketones are incredible, and they're incredible for health. I'm using them in patients who suffer with advanced polycystic kidney disease. It increases insulin resistance. So I'm using it with clients who suffer with diabetes and insulin resistance. It's brilliant for breaching the blood-brain barrier when glucose can't. So it's being used with clients I work with who suffer with dementia and Alzheimer's. And it helps because the body preferences BHB. It's also being used for people who suffer with cancers and tumors. And none of this is medical advice. I'm not saying if you take these things, that this is going to help with any of these things. But I would stress to do your research, because anecdotally, what you see with, a lot of these things is some positive results. So not medical advice, do your own research. But living the lifestyle, that's what it's done to me. And this is what we're here to talk about, is my story. And I see it in lots of clients that I work with as far as living the lifestyle. But the supplementation is there, should you wish to go down that route as well. But what you eat is going to have the biggest impact. I'm a big advocate of, real food, what we consume, and meat, eggs, fish, and cheese is going to be the biggest, impact on health and well-being. It's the most nutrient-dense food on the planet, and it's devoid of all of these anti-nutrients we find in other foods as well. So the long answer to your question, apologies, I've gone well off track for that.
No, I love it.
And you were worried. You were worried before coming on air that we wouldn't have enough to talk about, but I told you we wouldn't be stuck of things to talk about.
Oh man, I told you before every episode, for the listener, I always stress out that I'm going to run out of things to say, or I'm not going to have enough questions or whatever, even after doing several hundred of these. But yeah, we always have so many interesting avenues to go down, and that was so well explained. I think the listener will really appreciate how different it is to live in this way and have this kind of energy and endurance than it is for what they're used to. And that's nothing to say about what you said earlier about mental conditions like depression, anxiety, which is the primary reason that I remain carnivore. I dropped my anxiety. I was worrying about things all the time. That dropped out, and that was enough of a motivator for me to just say, look, these are my foods. I'm gonna eat steak and eggs. Everything else is really just not my food, and I can maintain this lifestyle quite well. So I love the way you explain that. I love the way you've approached this. Just to see your life do that 180 like we talked about is so incredible. All the things you've been able to achieve, and it will be so exciting to continue to watch you and see what you're able to achieve moving forward. I
appreciate that.
It's really cool. Kind. Well, it's very deserved, and you're doing such a great job sharing your message as well, which I think is the most important. Richard Smith, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Fantastic. So the website, which is the core of the business, as you said earlier, quite kindly, is the ketopro.com. Now, lots of free information available on there. So we have a knowledge base, which is connected to all of the YouTube channel and podcasts as well. But there's recipes on there, free recipes for people who are looking to gravitate into keto and carnivore. They're free, completely free. There's shopping lists on there to give you an idea of the types of foods to eat. So this covers keto and carnivore. And what we've done is we've highlighted on there the foods that contain oxalates and lectins, so you can make an active decision as well. All this is free information. You can find me on YouTube under Keto-Pro. You can find me on Instagram under Keto_Pro. You can find me personally under Richard_Anthony_Smith. I used to be the carnivore athlete, but I've changed that to my name recently because I'm trying to, I speak to everybody. So, what I find within the community is that you either have to be one or the other. And I don't, there's a lot of keto police and carnivore police out there. And I'm anti this movement, because we're all on our own journey. If you want to live low carb, I'll support you. If you want to live a dirty keto lifestyle, I'll support you. If you want to live standard, strict keto carnivore, I'll support you. I'll support any transition you want to make into healthy well-being, and I'll educate you so you understand where the healthiest place to be is. But if you don't want to be there, and you want to sit right down this other end, that's perfectly fine. I'll put information and product out there to support you on that journey, but the product and information is available for everybody. And yeah, I think that's it. I mean, those are the biggest places for me. But yeah, I'd love to get some subscribers on my channel, because I'm not very well known within the space. A lot of my content was blocked quite early on. I was putting a lot of information out early on in regards to healthy well-being, and I don't think it was very well received within the YouTube and Facebook community. So a lot of content. So despite pushing this information for years, not a lot of it has got out there. So any of your listeners who would like to subscribe to my YouTube channel, thank you. That would be greatly appreciated. And share the content. Let's get the word out there, But yeah, that is it. That's where you can find me.
That's fantastic. It's amazing that you're putting out all those free resources, and I would strongly agree with you and say, for the listeners, for anybody that's watching, go subscribe to your channel, because there's great information there as well. You do a really nice job of getting that information out in a way that people can understand. And I just so much love and appreciate, in a world that can be very dogmatic and, people are taking sides and arguing about minutia of diets, you're able to work with all kinds of different people and get that message out there, which is, the biggest thing we need to do and the highest priority. Because like you said earlier in this discussion, if you're moving towards the elimination of carbohydrates and moving towards more fat and more protein, you're going to be healthier, whatever that looks like for you. And everybody's in a different phase in that journey. So I appreciate that you're reaching out to all kinds of people that way.
Really kind. Appreciate that. Way too
Yeah.
kind.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for appearing on our show today and taking the time. Go enjoy your bike ride, my friend. That'll be a great time, and I'm sure you'll do your 50 miles just fine. But thank you for taking time to be on our show today at the end of your day. We really appreciate you.
No, thank you so much for the opportunity, Casey. I've thoroughly enjoyed, and we'll arrange for you to come on mine soon if you're up for that.
Absolutely.
Again, yeah, not a lot of followers, but look, I really appreciate it. So you can spread your journey to my listeners and talk about your journey. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so very much. I'll look forward to that. I would be honored. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.